If it comes down to a legal battle, some constitutional experts say Parliament is likely to win. But for the moment, no one can explain why this happened. The FBI says there is no clear motive for the shootings. Conservatives say the problem is the chair of the committee, Liberal Senator Colin Kenny. They accuse him of holding meetings when they're not available, conducting an illegitimate vote, and hiring consultants that only report to him. What is the overall strategy for the campaign right now to make sure he grows? Thank you, Peter. Mr. Layton, I appreciate that you might need some more time to review the finer points of the speech. But at first blush, is this something that your party is prepared to support, or will you vote against it? But it appears the proverbial whistle hasn't been blown on anything. The senators were cleared of any inappropriate spending last week by a Senate committee that examined their travels. Coulter is accompanied on this trip by a personal bodyguard, and earlier today, she received a security escort out of Parliament after a television interview. This Dryden delegate is probably as well known to Canadians as Mr. Dryden himself. Former Montreal Canadian hockey legend Senator Frank Mahovlich. You're going to Mr. Ray. Why? Final question, looking for prediction, not in this race, the hockey game tonight. I understand you're going to try to make it to the Canadians game. Who's going to win? About 1,000 athletes from more than 40 countries will take part in these Paralympic Games. And as with the Olympics, there are dramatic stories behind every one of their achievements. Red Lake is a picture of peace and simplicity, but its people feel neither. Shock and grief have swept through this reservation.
Our community is devastated by this event. We have never seen anything like this in the history of our tribe, and without doubt, this is the darkest days in the history of our people.
This was the aftermath of a killing spree at the local high school. A 16-year-old boy shot and killed 5 students, a security guard, a teacher, and then himself. But before unleashing gunfire here, he visited the home of his grandfather, a police officer on the reservation. He killed him too, along with his companion.
We believe took the police bulletproof vest and gun belt of his grandfather, donned those, got into the police vehicle that his grandfather had, and drove to the school.
The FBI has confirmed the shooter is Jeffrey Weiss, seen here in older pictures. He's described by some of his peers as a loner, and there are reports he had a troubled background. A father who committed suicide, a mother who is in a nursing home with brain injuries after a car accident. Comments under Weiss's name appeared on a neo-Nazi website. He also apparently went on a neo-Nazi page and called himself the Angel of Death. Ashley Morrison was in the school when Weiss started shooting. She hid under her desk and called her mother from a cell phone.
He came back to our room and he was really trying to get in our classroom. And he was like shooting and banging on a door, and it was just scary.
She was, screaming, "Mom, he's at the door. Mom, he's trying to get in the door." She was like, "Mom, I'm scared. Come and get me."
At the local church, a prayer service to bring comfort to residents. Elaine Little is a school bus driver here. She came for both solace and answers.
How could this happen? Why did it happen? And my concern right away was my kids, because all of us drivers think of them as our kids.
But for the moment, no one can explain why this happened. The FBI says there is no clear motive for the shootings. It says there are still a lot of interviews to be done and a great deal of investigative work remains. Krista Erickson CBC News, Red Lake, Minnesota. Peter, the court heard today about a possible motive in this case, an alleged mercy killing. Captain Robert Semrau arrived at his military tribunal, a picture of self-confidence, pleading not guilty. Prosecutors wasted no time in trying to shatter that image. In October 2008, Captain Semrau was mentoring members of the Afghan National Army when they came under Taliban attack. An insurgent was severely injured, and according to the prosecution, members of the Afghan National Army did not want to treat the wounded man, saying his life was in Allah's hands. Captain Semrau allegedly said to fellow Canadian soldiers, "Turn around and go back. You do not and should not have to see this." Shots were heard, and the prosecution says Semrau was seen firing his gun on the wounded man. Prosecutors also allege that after the incident, Semrau told other soldiers he could not live with himself if he left an injured human being to die, and he was prepared to accept the fallout. It is shockingly unacceptable, and it is the type of behavior we could not accept or condone, lead prosecutor Lieutenant Colonel Mario Leveille told the court. Captain Semrau's lawyer had this to say about the prosecution's case.
Well, the prosecution can outline whatever case it thinks it might prove in its opening argument. The case that it does prove at the end of the day might turn out to be very different than what they expect at this stage. They still have to prove all those things, and it very much remains to be seen whether that's going to be possible.
The prosecution will indeed have its work cut out for it in trying to prove Captain Semrau is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The insurgent's body was never recovered, and as a result, an autopsy was never performed to determine the cause of death. The trial will eventually move to the alleged scene of the crime, Afghanistan. There, the court will hear more testimony from Afghan witnesses. Peter? Carol, organizers say about 2,000 people showed up here to protest Ann Coulter's speech, and the disorder has forced them to cancel the event.
If you want to get straight to the point, there you go.
Famously called Rush Limbaugh in a miniskirt, the conservative commentator and professional provocateur began her university tour with the usual bluster, whipping up students at the University of Western Ontario last night.
Should I be converted to Christianity? Since I don't have a magic carpet, what other modes do you suggest?
At least on American college campuses. What mode of transportation? Take a camel.
This book is about...
Coulter catapulted to America's A-list of political punditry after the September 11th attacks when she suggested in an article that the U.S. should invade Muslim countries, kill their leaders, and convert everyone to Christianity.
They genuinely did not care.
That makes no sense.
Given Coulter's inclination to inflame, one of the universities on her speech circuit thought it best to give her advance warning about the Canadian way. The University of Ottawa's vice president wrote to Coulter in an email saying, "There is a strong tradition in Canada, including at this university, of restraint, respect, and consideration in expressing even provocative and controversial opinions, and urge you to respect that Canadian tradition while on our campus."
And that will generate more publicity for her.
This media expert says the University of Ottawa's attempt to handle Coulter only fanned the flames of controversy.
Why do you actually want to give her something to allow her to develop her persona further and become more controversial?
Oh, that controversial.
Students are divided over Coulter's visit.
I don't know. If she has like racist opinions, then I'd prefer her not to be here.
A different opinion, I guess. People call she's like the right-wing Michael Moore. So I mean, maybe there's people who like her opinions.
Coulter is accompanied on this trip by a personal bodyguard, and earlier today she received a security escort out of Parliament after a television interview. Organizers say Coulter simply does not feel safe enough to deliver this speech tonight, and while this event has been cancelled, her tour will continue with her next stop in Alberta. Carol? Thank you, Peter. Mr. Layton, I appreciate that you might need some more time to review the finer points of the speech, but at first blush, is this something that your party is prepared to support, or will you vote against it?
Well, we said that Mr. Harper had to change direction. He's taking the country in the wrong direction on Afghanistan, and we saw no change in the speech from the throne. He's taking us on the wrong direction on the environment, and he simply said he would bring back the Clean Air Act that we had worked to make a terrific piece of legislation, but he would take all the good, important parts out of it. And then finally, we said that we needed to see the Prime Minister address the growing prosperity gap, the folks who are struggling but slipping further and further behind because they can't pay for their education of their kids and care for their parents and get child care and all of these fundamentals. We saw no recognition of those issues in the speech, so we're left with no choice. We have a mandate to oppose the direction Mr. Harper was going. He's going the wrong direction on the war, the environment, and the impact on the daily life of families, so we'll be opposing the speech.
And we won't ask you about amendments because I understand that you don't have an opportunity to make amendments. But I want to ask you about future confidence votes. If the Liberals allow the speech to pass, we still have a situation where you're going to be faced with endless confidence votes on the elements within the throne speech. How will you deal with those confidence votes?
Well, I think the first question is why would Mr. Dion and the Liberals prop up the Conservative government when its agenda and direction are so clearly wrong for Canada? And he's going to have some explaining to do because he will have given Mr. Harper a mandate to govern. Mr. Dion and the Liberals, I hope, are at least going to show up and vote and not play hooky from the House on the vote on the speech from the throne.
But on confidence motions, will you be working to bring down the government, or will you be propping them up?
Well, we'll be, of course, we're the only party that's voted against this government on all of the major confidence motions so far. I doubt that that's going to change. We'll look at legislation. We don't believe that legislation should be used as continuous brinkmanship. We think that's the Prime Minister playing some games, but we'll take it a step at a time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Layton.
Thanks.
So, Peter, there you have it, the NDP also opposing the speech from the throne.
It's a collector's item. It may become someone's nightie, I think.
Joking aside, Conservative Mark Warner says most of his campaign materials are now destined for the recycling bin. Last night, the party told him he was being dropped from its roster of candidates for the next federal election.
We were organized.
The candidate who won the nomination for Toronto Centre said he was ousted in part for giving an interview to a national magazine about working with a former Liberal cabinet minister.
I was told, that the answer when a reporter comes up like that is to say no comment. I'm offended by it. I mean, obviously, I think it's important to use the modern means of communication to reach people.
The other dispute, Warner says, issues in his downtown riding the party didn't want him addressing in his campaign literature. Affordable housing, more money for education, and his attendance at an international AIDS conference in Toronto in 2006.
One of the things that I find really strange is that when, the bio went up to Ottawa, one of the items they took out was the fact that I attended this conference. And it does seem to be something that bothers people, and I don't exactly know why.
You gotta know what they know. That AIDS conference was the same one that Stephen Harper was criticized for not attending.
The Chair of National Council.
In Guelph, Ontario, there are also campaign materials destined for the dustbins. Brent Barr ran for the Conservatives here in 2005. He won the nomination again in March for the next election. But he too has just been informed he won't be running.
They said that I wasn't out actually canvassing. But that is a complete false statement. And as I can show you with my shoes, we actually wore a hole in this pair of shoes out there canvassing on a day-to-day basis.
Barr says he has strong suspicions the party decided it wants to parachute a hand-picked candidate into the riding instead of the one chosen by riding members.
By removing me, it's a slap in the face of democracy, and I suspect that will come back and hurt them in this riding in the next election.
It's the very same issue Stephen Harper made campaign promises on in the 2006 election. Here's what he had to say at the time.
We want to clean up internal party politics, beginning with grassroots democratic control of the nomination process.
The Conservative Party president would not reveal the precise reasons for dropping the two candidates, citing privacy issues. Don Plett would only say there were concerns, and because of those concerns, the party had to take action. Krista Erickson, CBC News, Toronto.